Okay, this is the Age of Jackson, Element 2, Part 1, about this unique figure in American history, Andrew Jackson. He's the one who started the modern Democratic Party in the election of 1828, but there's a lot more to Andrew Jackson than that makes him pretty fascinating. The first was his physical appearance. Andrew Jackson was very tall and thin with bushy hair and craggy eyebrows. He's got one of the most unique appearances of any president in American history. However, in the eyes of many presidential historians, it's not Andrew Jackson's physical appearance that makes him unique. What makes him unique is that many presidential historians consider him to be mentally unstable, possibly the most mentally unstable president we've ever had. Now, I have absolutely no idea if that's true or not, but people who study Andrew Jackson, or among those people who study Andrew Jackson, one of them said he suffered from many of the maladies that a lot of people suffer from today, but if he had access to today's medications meant to treat those things, he wouldn't have taken it anyway. Essentially, this guy was basically saying that even if there was something mentally imbalanced about Andrew Jackson, he would have been too stubborn to do anything about it. Now, Andrew Jackson's background is really interesting. He was born in a log cabin in the Carolinas, but he didn't really fit in there. He lost his parents at a young age, and a lot of presidential historians point to that being the reason for the fact that he was a mischievous and undisciplined child who often got into a lot of fights, sometimes even taking on teachers. This is supposed to be a political cartoon of Andrew Jackson as a boy. As a result, Andrew Jackson really didn't get much of an education. He definitely didn't have a college education, and he brought himself up in the military. He did a lot more fighting than he did schooling. But that military experience would pay off for him later on. He was known as a war hero in the War of 1812 and was also known as a hero in a series of border excursions against Native Americans in Florida in 1819. He had a very well established and impressive war record, and like I said, that would benefit him later on when he ran for president. He was also well known for having a bad temper. He would instantly fight or duel somebody if he felt dishonored, no matter who it was. Now, eventually, this characteristic would be bad for Andrew Jackson, but it would end up being kind of good as well. I know that sounds weird, but here's the thing. This propensity to fight or duel anytime he felt dishonored got him into a lot of duels, and he lost a couple of times. Remember, a duel is not shooting somebody until they die. That's often the result, but a duel is basically the idea that you take 15 paces, turn around, and the first guy to get shot loses. Doesn't mean you necessarily die, though. Andrew Jackson won his share of duels, but he lost a couple of times too, and eventually he got lead poisoning from two musket balls that were still in his body. And he survived to old age with those musket balls in his body. So that earned him the nickname Old Hickory, which is the strongest and toughest tree in the woods. Now, that's where the good part comes in. See, Andrew Jackson ran in a lot of political elections, and he would use the Old Hickory nickname to help out with his public image. So, getting shot with a couple of musket balls might have been bad for him in terms of his own health, but it helped him politically at least. He was a tough old bird. Okay, anyway, back to his background here. Eventually, Andrew Jackson leaves the Carolinas and moves to Tennessee, which, frankly, in terms of culture and lifestyle and physical surroundings, everything there just fit him better. He eventually becomes a judge from Tennessee and a congressman representing the state of Tennessee in the House of Representatives. He also is eventually going to get married to this lady, Rachel Robards, before she became Rachel Jackson. But the problem is that happened before she was legally divorced from her first husband. Both she and Andrew thought the matter had been settled, and they corrected it soon thereafter to make everything completely legal. But nonetheless, this became the central feature of the campaign of 1828, and she became the primary target of the John Quincy Adams campaign. Unfortunately for both of them, a month after his election in 1828, Rachel Jackson died. And in his mourning and in his grieving, he never forgave John Quincy Adams or Henry Clay for making her the target in that campaign. Now, a little more on the funny side here that actually gives you a little bit of trivia about the Democratic Party. During the campaign of 1828 and in the beginnings of his presidency shortly thereafter, Andrew Jackson was often referred to as a jackass, and he proudly made the donkey the symbol of his political campaign. And since Jackson was a Democrat, the donkey is still the symbol of the Democratic Party today. But one thing that's not widely known about Andrew Jackson is that despite growing up in poor circumstances in the rural countryside and with very little education, by the time of his election, he was a wealthy landowner with many slaves. By that time, Andrew Jackson lived in one of the finest mansions in America. Located in rural Tennessee, it was called the Hermitage. Keep your jokes to yourself. On the serious side, though, one presidential historian said that Jackson went into a bit of a hermit-like state after Rachel died, and they thought maybe that's why he named the mansion what he did. I don't know if that's true or not. It's just something that somebody brought up at one time. So when you look at Andrew Jackson, he is kind of a common man. He grew up in poor conditions in the rural South, in the countryside. He knew how to farm. He knew how to fight. He represented a very large portion of what America was at that time. But he's also kind of an aristocrat with a lot of wealth and a lot of land holdings living in a mansion. In truth, he's a little bit of both. And when he gets inaugurated in 1829 in Washington, D.C., all of his common man supporters, known as the Hickoryites, came by the hundreds to Washington to go to the White House for the inaugural ball. Now, many of the Hickoryites couldn't get rooms in the local inns and hotels that were in town there, so they just took to sleeping in hotel hallways on the floor. When they showed up for the inaugural ball, they absolutely ruined the White House during the party and only emptied out when they were told bowls of spiked punch were being served on the lawn. Many were completely appalled by this display. No president had ever welcomed in a group so rowdy before, and they were appalled by quote-unquote King Mob and what had happened at the quote-unquote inaugural brawl. So as you can see here, Andrew Jackson is a pretty interesting guy. In the next element, or part 2 of element 2, I should say, we're going to get into some of his domestic policies, and you're going to see his personality very well reflected in those as well. That's it. Thanks for listening.